And so I tell you, keep on asking, and you will receive what you ask for. Keep on seeking, and you will find. Keep on knocking, and the door will be opened to you. For everyone who asks, receives. Everyone who seeks, finds. And to everyone who knocks, the door will be opened. Come journey with us, and let us show you the way. Trinity TV, that you may have life.
Good evening and welcome to episode 4 in our series on the theme Nonviolence Begins With Me here on Trinity TV. I'm Andy Johnson. In this episode, we'll try and explore the issue of breaking the violence cycle in children through parental action and intervention. We welcome back our expert discussants from the last segment, Dr. Margaret Nakid-Chaturu, a clinical and developmental psychologist. She is the current president of the Trinidad and Tobago Association of Psychologists. And Anne John, a clinical psychologist who specializes in mental illness and disabilities and psychological assessment. She's associated with the NGO Families in Action. As usual, we invite you in the audience to join in the discussion at the appropriate time. You'll see the number come up on the screen and you can engage with us on Facebook. So good evening. Let's start.
Good evening.
Both of you. Let's start with you, Anne. What's your opening statement on this theme about parental action and intervention, if we're talking about breaking the cycle of violence in children?
Okay. I think one of the things I wanted to look at is the perspective of the term violence. And ever so often, you know, parents may tell us, oh, we don't have any violence happening in the homes, because they look at the word violence and think physical. So sometimes we may have to remove the word and put the term abuse. And with utilizing that word, we can recognize then that the way parents speak to the children, the way parents interact with each other, it creates a lot of verbal abuse and creates, of course, the emotional and mental abuse. So parents, you know, when you're looking at interacting with the children, where we look at the communication style, that is something that is very important in terms of helping children to see themselves differently, more stable and everything in the family home in terms of that word abuse. And in effect, it also helps the children to feel better. When they go to the schools, when they're in any other environment, they feel better within themselves. You also have the idea that when parents, for example, there's just like they're like combatants. So they go at each other because they want to score points and not recognizing the children are listening. Remember, last time I mentioned they are observational learners. And so they're taking in everything and they feel it. They sometimes think in terms, okay, I'm the one, you know, that is causing my parents to have this way that they see each other. Sometimes it's not face-to-face, it could be, for example, on the telephone. So when we look at what is happening to the children, what we also can recognize is that the symptoms that come from children when they are experiencing abuse, and it could be vicarious, not you know, in comparison to direct abuse. The same symptoms occur. They have the withdrawal, going into depression, irritability, aggression. The schoolwork is not up to par. And of course, when they go into the schools, you find themselves becoming violent to other children. If they have siblings, they do the same thing. So it's like they're being enabled to think in terms of, we are not feeling okay with ourselves because our home is not the way we like it to be. So you find then that we act out. And the acting out creates a lot of violence again, as I use the term abuse, it could be very verbal.
Yeah.
And it affects the children ever so often. So I think one of the things we have to look at is the communication style in the home. Conflicts are always there. It's a natural. But importantly, how you resolve conflict, how you handle conflict is so important. So the child doesn't feel, mom and dad are quarreling about me. Perhaps I am responsible for what's happening. They probably need me out of the way. And so you do have children who think suicidal thoughts because of what's happening between the parents. And they want to vent out. They want to belong, so you find that's where children are now engaging in formation of gangs, belongingness, wanting to feel some sense of love, sense someone cares for me, or they may go to someone else who may be giving them some attention with, unfortunately, ulterior motives. So again, the child now is exposed to even more risks and danger. So we have to look in terms of, for example, when the children are at schools, what can help them to understand that violence is not the way to go if the parents themselves are not doing the necessary. And what we look at, I know there's a particular subject in the school called social studies, which goes from the primary right up to the secondary. However, I'm not sure what the syllabus entails. Probably that's one of the ways to start with the children, because you can help them to understand respect for each other, consideration, understanding of different views, not having to fight about it, because remember, they're seeing their parents doing the same. So how to help them to understand this is not the way to go,
I want to come back and ask you about how natural it is that children take responsibility, take it upon themselves to feel responsible for what they see their parents do and say. But let me get you in at this point, Dr. Naked Chatru. So what's your main statement on if we talk about parental action and intervention in trying to break this cycle of violence in children?
All right, so I would like this afternoon, welcome again viewers, to discuss parenting within a non-violent framework, Andy. And last time, as Anne said, we looked at parenting styles, we looked at the fact that many children observe and they learn and they imitate and they model parents through vicarious learning, etc. But I also want us to consider what is the reality of parenting in a holistic way, especially in light of that article that was in the paper about 3 weeks ago when a mother's house crumbled and they found her in an outhouse with her baby and 2-year-old parenting. And you know, it is sometimes very easy for us, Andy, I think, to talk about parenting and parenting styles, and we should do this, and you know, children should learn within a kind of framework, when we have parents who are trying to do their best in adverse situations, parents who cannot go, let's say, up on the hierarchy of Maslow's needs, when the basis is physiological needs. Okay, you have to see about your children, make sure they have food before you can even go into love and esteem and parenting. So I'd like us to examine the reality of that in a country like Trinidad and Tobago, where when we talk about non-violence, our first reaction is it starts with me. Non-violence starts with me, but what does that suggest? Yes, you're concentrating on your family and all of that, but what about the other? What is really non-violence, Andy? And I think that in this country we have become a little bit too passive. And we talk about non-violence, and you know, there's a thing that don't talk about what's happening in the home too much. Just be quiet and so. But we got to explore that. We got to explore the fact that we cannot have non-violence in our society just focusing on self. It has to be that other, that mother in that outhouse, those people who cannot afford to put food on their table, those people who are in adverse situations. Because one of the things I've found, especially with teachers, and last viewing we had a teacher who called in and said, how can I help students? What are the strategies that we can use? And many teachers cannot work in situations or help to parent children when children are coming into the classrooms, as Anne said, victims of abuse, victims of trauma, perhaps not even eaten for the day. How can you reach at a cognitive level for children? Parents in the home, how can you all of the things that we say, love and esteem and belong, and how can you do that when they can't even put food on the table? So hopefully tonight we can unpack what does non-violence really mean in the context of parenting, in the context of telling parents don't abuse, when all they can do is hopefully put food on the table and give a slap here and there and move on, because that's all they know. So I would like to look at that, and again, the strategies that can assist these parents.
Right. Again, you know, I don't know to what extent it makes sense going back to when we were small, and people say that, well, we didn't have much, but our parents raised us properly.
Yes.
Well, I always say, you know, the attempts to go back in time can be very challenging and difficult. The era we live in now, we have to recognize it's vastly different in many ways. And I think one of the things that's happened is materialism has taken over. The living, the way we want to live, when we look in terms, for example, of poverty, poverty becomes relative. It's about comparing self one to another, and this creates whereby children, we know peer pressure goes on in the schools, and that creates whereby the children is in school, they see what others have, they want the same, they go home, they demand it of the parents, and of course the parents just wanting to, whether it's for peace sake or whether they feel the need to give it because the child is demanding, they make these attempts, and of course that affects the ability to handle things. So thinking in terms of, yes, long ago, children would go to school even with barefooted, and it was okay. Children would go, for example, without texts, and it was about, we were taught to share. Now you have to have your textbook. So that may be something we have to look at.
The times are just different. We can't expect to sort of return to some of those values, because
there may be someone could return to, but in terms of looking at what is happening now, we have to look at the exposure to internet, exposure to movies, the difference in terms of what is inculcated in children now, the belief system, so that it's not as it was before. You have both parents having now to go to work where there are two parents home. Then, of course, you have the single parenting whereby one parent is totally absent. So you find that level of interaction and helping children to see things differently is not happening. So going back may not be the way we can go. Yes, I agree.
You're saying it's not possible to go back?
Only in some instances. It's very difficult to go back in times in everything we can think of.
Yeah. To chat a little bit about this business of children taking responsibility for sometimes the breakdown in the relationship between parents. Where does that come from? It's natural, because we hear about it a lot. Children act out because they feel responsible for the dysfunction among their parents.
Yes, especially in situations where they witness the parents quarreling, and then separation and then divorce. You know, I always, even though this is a mix that I always say, Andy, if you intend to separate, if you intend to divorce, do it when the child is 16 or over, because it is at this stage where they can begin to understand. Children take blame for their parents' actions when they're very young. When parents are quarreling, they always ask themselves, I wonder if it's about me. I wonder if I am the cause. Because if a father leaves the home, a child grieves, and a child feels, I wonder what I did wrong. Maybe it is because I raised my voice, not realizing that the dynamics and the variables are far more than their little minds can think. So many children, I think, under 16 really take blame, and they always, even though it's a toxic relationship, all children want their parents to be together. They want that family unit. That's what they see on TV. That's what their friends talk about. And I know a lot of children who have lost a parent or whose parent is not in the home, and they become very reactive in schools, and teachers do not link those aggressive behaviors and those reactive behaviors to loss. And that is a major issue for a lot of children growing up now, that trauma associated. And when we talk about abuse, as Anne said, it may not just be physical, it's that emotional trauma that a lot of children carry around and take blame for their parents' actions.
Yeah, but you know, a long time ago in a school in Toronto, I'd read stuff about what was called, and there was a book on the subject called Divorced Kids, and in some instances they were talking about children who knew that their parents were going through difficult periods or going through difficulties, but were trying to hide it from them, but they found out, and they lived with knowing that they know what's going on, but the parents trying to
hide it,
prevent them from what's going on.
Those situations are always traumatic, and even when the the parents stay in the home and they witness. Because when parents come to me about children who are acting out, the first thing I always ask them, Andy, is what have they seen? What have they seen you do? What have they seen you talk about? Because it is through that kind of window that you can begin to understand the children. Just last weekend, I had a family come in about their daughter. She's a grown woman, 21. But when I started to trace back what happened to her, 3, 4, 5, then they were, because they now began to understand those early experiences, witnessing trauma in the home seriously affected her. And in our society is a society, Andy, I think that masks a lot. We hide it. You know, we have been taught, I was taught girls are seen and not heard. But we need to give children a voice.
Well, children generally at a point in time. But you said it was more so on girls.
More so on girls.
Yeah.
But now we need to give children that opportunity to voice how they're feeling. Younger children, you have to make time to hear them. Older children, zip the lip, open the air, because children want to talk, but you have to create that space, that opportunity for them to talk about what's happening.
All right, so let's go back to the issue of how parents talk to children, because there's a man named Marshall Rosenberg who wrote some books about what he called nonviolent language.
Yes.
Because as you say, people
Yes.
believe that violence is only physical. But
that's right.
give an example of what violent language is.
Well,
in terms of parent-child.
derogatory statements, you know, telling the child what you look like or what you are, and these would affect, you know, in terms of, and sometimes we don't recognize the words we use, the statements used, insulting words. That leaves a very lasting scar, so that these children, as they get older, become adults, it still stays within them. And this is what would create, you know, a child not feeling himself. They're worth anything at all because of it. So yes, it's a lot. And then I know when
you think parents who shout at children?
Well, the shouting is, and then we always say, you shout at the child shouts back at you. Because they want to be heard, you know. And if they believe that's how the parents feel about, that's the best way to produce any conversation, well, I will do it. I will go along with you. So again, you know, they just learn as things are happening to them. So then, yes, so you find then the words that are spoken to the children, they feel it a lot. And it's a parent. So if a parent tells me, I'm stupid, I'm a dunce, my face look like whatever, they accept.
You wouldn't come
and they feel it.
Yeah,
this is the whole thing.
But that is so crucial, Andy. I want to add to that, because many parents out there, they use derogatory language, they curse their children, but they don't want their children to curse back.
Sure.
And many children keep it in, but they start to react, because they are little ones, and you are a big adult. I can't hit you back, I can't. But they begin to internalize, because, Andy, children love their parents. Those are the role models that they look up to. So when you have a parent who, through derogatory language, tells you in profanities, and you can't answer back or you can't tell them, they keep that in and they remember it, so that when they become teenagers and they tell their parents the same thing, parents are, but what's happening there? But it is what the child has internalized and just given you back as good as they got.
Because what about parents who reach their wits' end, and as you know, we grew up hearing this thing with black hen chickens, you have to talk to them like that, because they don't understand normal conversation, normal instructions, do this, don't do that, do this. And
how were they spoken to? You know, there are so many repercussions of that. You know, I had a mother come in about her 14-year-old daughter, and she says the daughter is reactive and cursing me and all of that. And the daughter is very quiet when she comes into the counseling session, and she says, did my mother tell you that she cusses me, the MC and the F? I said, no, of course mom didn't tell me that. But daughter is now giving her back exactly as the mother treated her. And unless parents realize that children are watching them closely, some of our children know us better than we know ourselves, or other people out there know us. Unless they recognize that, I think they would curb their behavior, because many parents are about, do as I say, but not as I do. You know, so it's very difficult.
So how do we begin to turn this tide around?
Well,
so again,
you know, in terms of how to assist, how to help parents think differently, act differently.
I think I asked it last week where we should be working on parents more than on children.
Well, I think because I remember mentioning parents have the ultimate responsibility for the child's development. Yes, they have to work long hours, many of them. Some of them even go to school. So they, looking at that aspect of parenting and at the same time trying to enhance self. So one of the things we have to look at, of course, is self-care. Parents know that they are experiencing a lot of stress, whether it's work issues or anything else. But at the same time, they need to be able to project themselves in such a way that it can help the children to develop in some, properly. So they need to look after themselves. Stress management and everything else is important, so that whenever they're faced with challenges, you better handling it. Your coping skills can be enhanced to help in a situation like that. So then you have the different behaviors that have to come from parents. Communication. Yes, I'm tired. Yes, I'm feeling everything, financially and everything else. But why do I take it out on the child? And that's very important to recognize. So parents have to start to admit, recognize, accept that some things need to be modified in their behaviors to help them in terms of how they interact with their children.
Yeah.
That is very important.
There was an organization with the name Creative Parenting, a lady named Joan Bishop talked about that and so on.
Yes.
So that's the name, but I imagine there are other kinds of approaches to parenting that take that same kind of template. Let's talk a little bit about what that means.
In 2000, I did a pilot program called Yes, Youth Empowerment Series. And this was a triangular approach, Andy, to parenting. In that program, we had a lot of children who were reactive and aggressive and at risk, as they call them, in the schools. But I thought that we could not counsel them unless we had the parents on board. So what we did is, on a Saturday, for example, if you look at Creative Parent, we had the parents come in, and separately we had people who came in and counseled those parents. Many of these parents were single mothers who were not able to introduce strategies into the home, who wanted to know more about what to do. So whilst we were counseling their children, some counselors, we had others doing the parents. And
counseling the parents.
Counseling the parents. And the dynamic there, Andy, was amazing, because once children know that parents are interested, they knew their parents were in a separate room being counseled there because of them. That created so much change in how they approached it. And parents were glad to know that their children were in a safe place. We had to separate some of these parents into different groups, medium risk, high risk, because, of course, it was a volatile situation. And we offered breakfast. This NGO offered breakfast for them. So they came together about 3 hours every Saturday in a space where both entities, parent and child, and they were taught parenting strategies, what to do, how to do. When you talk about creative parenting, therefore, Andy, I think you're looking at providing interventions, providing strategies that are realistic to single parents, to homes that do not have what others do have, and getting them to work with the children they have. Because last session I mentioned many parents wish that they had children who were not theirs, or children, the other child. You know, you have to work, you have to understand your child, observe. And I think Anne spoke a little bit about being able to observe and problem solve and your own child, and provide strategies for helping and for parenting in a proactive, not a reactive way.
As a matter of fact, I want to add to what you're saying. We have a program called TAG, Together We Achieve Growth. So we have the children, we have workshops with the children separate from the parents, and the parent. And importantly,
together you mean that parents and children?
Parents, yes. Okay. But what we do, the same topics we would be having with the children, we have separately with the parents, the communication style, anger management, lifted self-esteem, you know, all the different ones we put together. And yes, there are times in these workshops, on certain days, parent and child come together, interact, showing them how to play together, do things together. So that is one way we look at and sharing both parent and child, then talking about issues together. So that is one way, you know, it is something that can continue to help in terms of improvement within the family dynamics.
Does it make a difference in situations where people become parents because they didn't want to? Again, a man named Sapolsky, I just finished reading some stuff from him, and he was talking about what happens when children come into the world from parents who didn't want them.
Yes.
And the dynamic so that gets sort of transported to the children that
they're not wanted.
Yeah.
Yes, it is possible.
And that is a
I
source
think
of some of what we're dealing with.
Correct.
Yes, behaviors coming from that emanates from the parent represents that. So sometimes you may not have to say the words, but just the action of how the parent treats a child makes the child feel he or she is not wanted.
And not only that, that's the basic element, Andy, I think, of trust and mistrust.
Yes,
trust
from babies,
begins
from the
infancy.
infant. Yes.
If the infant is left alone, if the infant is not attended to, if the infant is not embraced or hugged, the infant learns to mistrust. And that is the beginning of a host of problems. So instead of the infant going on the right side of the fence, it's on the left already from infancy, and learning how to deal with that. Many children out there have to cope from early o'clock, and you know, we're not aware of it. From 2, 3 years old, they have to fend for themselves because some parents are really not doing what they're supposed to do. And you are correct. What about in situations where parents do not want their children and they have them just because, and they just, you know, go out to parties? We've heard of that in Trinidad, where you leave your children in the care of older siblings. And so look at what happened to that 15-month-old baby recently, you know.
And those things set and train a cycle, which sometimes it's difficult to retrieve.
That's a generational cycle, I think, of abuse, of instability.
Yes, it definitely happens.
To some extent, what we're talking about here, people will be listening and in their minds, or viewing, and in their minds, we're looking at a kind of profile of a parent, right? Low socioeconomic status, fighting for a job when the day comes, fighting to make ends meet. Does it reside there exclusively, or you have that kind of dysfunctional parenting across
the board,
socioeconomic
across the board, it happens.
levels?
Yes, it is happening across the board.
Does it display itself differently?
That's, I think, is the difference one may look at in terms of looking at, you know, how the child and parent may interact. I think what happens, the economic issues or situation impacts differently. So that, for example, I know some years ago there was an instance where a she would have been A-level student, was found dead in the East and lived in the West. And her 2 parents were very high-level persons within society in terms of
high SES,
job.
As they say.
Yes. But they hadn't a clue that the daughter had even a boyfriend. She went to what we call a so-called prestige school, and would use the parents' signature to ask for time off. And so right away you saw a communication issue here. Nothing, no conversation. They never knew that the daughter was involved with someone else, that she could go in the East and actually got her dead there. And it's only then certain things came out of it, you know. And that's just one of the extreme cases, unfortunately. But ever so often that is happening. It's just that the lower socio, you know, the income persons, what happens to them is that it's brought out in the public. So we hear a lot about them because, unfortunately, perhaps it is that they don't get the privacy as the higher hierarchies would get. So we tend to believe it's just there, it's happening, but it's not.
Yeah, years ago, in some studies he'd done on that, Professor Ramesh Dusran wrote these papers, and in one of them he talked about the phenomenon of truancy among girls from well-to-do families going to the best schools.
Yes.
And that's a cohort of children who present with significant problems.
In some of these families, especially well-to-do families, and so, Andy, what I found is that parents tend to be very permissive, very laissez-faire. When their children reach a certain age, 14, 15, they feel that they are capable enough and competent enough. But remember, as I said, I think last session, between 13 to 18, that's the middle adolescent age, and I think the most difficult age for children. And that's when children are testing out many things, substance abuse, smoking, you know, lots of things with their friends. And parents tend to let go, especially in these families where they provide them, they go to good schools, they provide them with all the material things, and they said, yeah, it's okay.
Huge allowances.
Yes, these allowances, but children still need parents. And what I have found especially is, as you're looking at the middle and upper class levels, Andy, a lot of these children get into substance abuse because in their homes their parents have a lot of alcohol and they have access to a lot of things, you know, and it is easy for children therefore to transition into deviance. You're talking about the low socioeconomic, and I think that poverty is akin to violence, which is why there are many instances of abuse and violence in homes that are on the low socioeconomic status.
All right, so let's come back on the, on the theme now. How do we encourage parents to break these cycles wherever they may be on the socioeconomic scale?
It's kind of challenging in terms of asking, can they go back to basics? First of all, knowing you're a parent. First of all, knowing that you have a child or children, that you need to do the best you can with them. And you see the word I'm using, the best you can. There are a lot of dynamics where parenting is concerned. So we don't expect that perfect parent, but it's just more involvement in the child or children to help them, you know, in terms of what may be happening. How parents could, instead of just thinking about themselves and what's happening to them, that they could recognize, yes, things are happening to me, which I need to handle. However, I do have a child or children to look after. What best I can do? Can I recognize that the way I'm handling it is not the right way? So if I find, for example, where there's that violence or abuse in the homes, if the parent is not able to recognize that he or she is behaving in a manner that's not conducive to the child's stability, they will continue. So the question might be how, or whether someone could bring it to their attention, whether they'll pay heed to it, or whether they'll just continue. So that is something that has to be, you know, brought to the table in terms of how best to go forward.
Yeah, you want to say?
Yeah, I would like to unpack that a little bit. And in that, you're saying, how can we help parents break the cycle?
Yep.
Many parents parent because that's how they learn. That's the only thing that they know. And for many of them, they think, I got through it, so my children will get through it. So you have to go at a deeper level, I think, here to the philosophy of that parent. What is their attitude to life? What's their attitude about parenting? Because if you don't attack that, then you go right back to them believing that beating is good or abuse is good, or I could leave my children by the neighbor because my parent let me. You have to go to, and I think through empowerment, through education, that is where we need to get to. Because many parents, we think have it, but they just don't know how to. What's their philosophy? And you talked about nonviolence, and nonviolence is really an attitude to life, you know, a thought that becomes action, that is translated into behaviors. And once you do not have that positive thinking, then you can continue to abuse and to react in negative ways, therefore continuing that cycle of instability.
Yeah. How do you begin to acquire that kind of attitude?
I think by a lot of the empowerment campaigns. And in Trinidad, I think, and it's a pleasant thing to see, there are a lot of parenting skills. Well, the government a few years ago really started this in those learning enhancement centers. I don't know to what extent now it continues, but especially in pocket areas where we know that there is poverty, where there is violence, we need really to start those training programs. And I know that they have done that, but it needs to be done more, you know, as they're building all of these basketball courts and so, have spaces for parents, because parents need the know-how, they need what to do, what are they doing differently. Because one of the things we always assume, Andy, is that parents don't love their children, don't want their best. Even in the most, in the lowest socioeconomic status, there are parents there who really put themselves out. People kind of cast blame on Laventil, for example, as if people don't know what they're doing there. We know that some of the best people have come out of areas like that, and they would love to know what to do. What more can we do? So I think, again, back to the basics, empowerment, education, training, providing opportunities for parents.
Well, I think we have been doing, you know, the government has been having parenting workshops throughout Trinidad and Tobago, actually. And that is one way to go. However, that means we tapping into parents, but we also need to tap into parents to be. And I remember some years ago, we went to a health center, and we did quite a number of topics with first-time parents who were pregnant and would be having, and we went through all the stages with them, helping them to understand, not just when baby is born and how to look after the infant, but as the child develops and so on. But even before that, I'm thinking of parents who may not even, persons, young persons,
parents.
that's right, who not even thinking of being a parent. And I believe if you're going back into the school. Yes, because what is happening in the schools from the Form 2s, they're into very strong relationships, very deep adult-like relationships.
Yeah, okay, we'll come back to that, but I was about to invite callers, but I think they took a jump on us, and there's a caller on the line. Thank you very much for calling. Good evening.
Hello?
Hello, good evening.
Good night. I'm barely hearing you.
Yes, you go ahead.
Hello?
We're hearing you good. Hello?
You hearing me?
Yes.
We have to go right back to the long time days that children are being controlled by people, you know, in your district. We have to go right back there. Because if we don't go back there, we will never get anywhere.
All right. Thank you very much. I mean, we started talking about the possibility that exists about going back, but a lot of people stay there about the fact that we have to go back.
I don't agree with that.
The illusion that we have to go. That's what I'm saying. So speak to him as to how that is.
I just want to bring an analogy.
Yeah.
A child looks at the mom and said, "Mommy, why are you cutting the legs of the turkeys to put it to bake?" And the mother said, "Well, talk to your mother because I saw my mother doing it." And the child went to her grandmother. "Granny, why are you cutting the legs of the turkey to put it to bake?" "Well, I don't know. I saw my mother doing it." Grandmother great-grand is still around. "Great-grand, why are you cutting the legs of the..." "Well, because the tin was too small." So what I'm looking at is that we can't just go back and do everything we see without recognizing why things were done and whether it is that presently it can work as it worked then. So that's why I just thought I would bring that to let you know. And as I said, because of exposure children have now to all of the social media and the different levels of education is out there, the research system, everything, it's very difficult to think of going back in time to help children with where they are today because of all the confusion they're faced with. You can't
discipline a doctor by sending children to their rooms and banning them from going outside and play. And you can't do that because that is what obtained
long ago.
2 generations ago.
Why are you saying that we can't do it,
I'm asking.
I still think that there should always be consequences for actions. Yes. What I do believe is that parents do not enforce these consequences, and they have a very lax attitude to parenting. And this is what I've found. You know, there are children out there who manipulate parents, who tell parents how they should be, where to go, what to do. Parents need to get back control of what is happening within their families. And going back, I don't advocate for that because we don't have the variables that we had long ago. Long ago, we had the extended family where you could leave children and you trusted the neighbor and you trusted the auntie to take care of. We don't have those support systems in place anymore. It is very dangerous to leave children now with the neighbor because you don't know who is there. Exactly. And I've had so many children come in for counseling who went to overnight. My children always used to, you know, really be angry that I didn't let them overnight by people. But you have the brother who is there or the uncle who is watching, but you don't, but parents are not as vigilant as before. So, you know, going back, I don't think it should ever be an option. Going forward, being proactive, learning what to do as parents in situations.
So there's no value in talking about going back to basics?
Well, as you said, there may be certain aspects that we can still utilize presently. However, even if you think in terms of extended families, remember the grandparents now are very young and they're still working. So who are you going to, have the children look up, being there for them to see someone? And there's, I think too, we have what we call a nuclear family now. So there's a lot of rift. So there's no connection anymore in terms of this supposed extended family we had then. Then the idea of it takes a community to raise, or it takes a village to raise a child, that no longer can apply. And I mean, if we face the facts of what's going on out here now, it's very difficult for us to see ourselves dependent on the villagers around or the community elders or members to look after our children.
So therefore the challenges of parenting have increased because of
it. Has. There are no two ways, and this is it. We have to have great empathy for parents now. It's highly challenging in terms of knowing we have to work, we have to make things okay, we have to make ourselves feel okay. We are faced with so many, and at the same time we have to see how best we can help and probably bring up our child in some way that is conducive to proper development. And at the same time, the children are exposed to so much. So they question parents. Long ago, you couldn't question your parent. So they tell you to do something, you just do it. And as we always say, do as I say and not I do. But the thing about it now, it's important that children can ask questions and get an answer.
All right, let me ask you, Doctor, and then come back to you on that. How must parents in this time respond to children who aren't afraid to ask questions, aren't afraid to challenge the authority that you're trying to dispense to them?
So yes, I think it's a good thing, Andy, that children can lend voice to issues. And I think that starts from early o'clock when the child begins to talk and the child asks, Mommy, why is this? Why is that? What's happening? Why? And begins to question, but many parents shut them up at that point, I'm too busy now. Go ask somebody, or go and do your work, or go in front of the TV. Don't ask me why. Just do it, But children are not satisfied with that. So you ask, how do we parent children like these? I think that we have to be very careful of the difference between wanting to control them and wanting to take care of them. I don't think that we can no longer control our children because there are so much influences out there that tells them differently. We have to observe our children because there's always a trigger why a behavior is happening, always a trigger. If it's not in the home, it's out there, something is happening. So we have to be vigilant with our children, and more importantly, in the same children who question, teach them also to problem solve. Let them know how to mediate, to negotiate, use skills of reasoning that we don't do, and we don't take the time to teach our children. Our children ask us why, and you notice that in the classroom, the children who would respond to questions from the teacher or always say, Miss, I know. Go back into the home and you would see parents there who have spoken to these children, who talk out issues with them, as opposed to the children in the classrooms who are very quiet, who have been taught not to talk, not to give voice to issues, not to question.
Talking it out, that is a theme that has been used let's say for the last couple of decades in different approaches to addressing issues among people.
And so on, yes.
To what extent really it's a slogan rather than something that is tangible and is seen to be working?
Well, yeah, as a slogan, yes, it's something that needs to be. Unfortunately, yes, it's not happening as we would like it to. And I think it's because technology has taken over. And that has created a lot of whereby you're not seeing that conversation happening in the homes anymore. Everybody is individually involved with self-issues, what they want to do. So that connection, I mean, they don't even sit sometimes to have a meal together at the table anymore. So you find the interaction is getting less and less. And children, when they come to session, could tell you, I don't like to talk to mommy. I don't feel to talk to daddy. Because the level of the sort of response they may get when they ask a question is not what they would like to. So children just gradually separate and find outside persons who they feel better interacting with. So that is something that you find it's important too, but it's not happening.
Do you have any sense? Yeah, do you have any sense, Doctor, about the extent to which some of these things happen, like family gatherings, meal times, and other times just for sharing?
You mean talking and so?
Yeah, and having meals together, sharing discussions and how important that is in what we're talking about here?
Again, that starts from, I think, when the children are developing. Families need to create rituals. They need to create opportunities. And when you have families where you have rituals like talking and, prayer time, and children grow up with that, it continues even though they have their peer groups. Because, Andy, again, you have to look at the developmental stages of children. Children who are older don't really want parents around. They want their peer group to talk to, and they're very comfortable in their peer group. But if those parents are persons who opened avenues for communication, they fall back on them for advice. But if you have parents who have not, then the children just keep moving on with their peer group. So again, rituals in the home are important, routines, opportunities for play, especially for younger children, opportunities to listen. And as I said before, with older children, with adolescents, parents need to zip the lip a little more, listen more. Even if you don't agree with what the child has to say, listen to what the child is telling you.
All right, we have another call on the line. Good evening.
Hi, good evening.
Good evening.
Very interesting topic. And I'm listening, and I don't know if I'm hearing, but parents in Trinidad and Tobago, everything is put to culture now in inverted commas. But you go out to the malls and you see adults with their children, and children may be distracted or they may be concerned about other things. And what's the parents or the adult's reaction? Is a boof and a tug and derogatory language to the children. There's never a moment, and you are in an entertainment area, you're supposed to be recreation time or leisure time with your children, and the responses children get from parents. And I've been to the malls, I've been to other places, and I'm looking at how parenting has changed from one of love and concern and encouragement to our children, and it's more of a put down. And it's because I think the parents themselves may have never had the love extended to them and the embrace extended to them, so they don't know any better. The other day I was at the mall, and there's this lady dragging the little child down the steps because the child didn't want to walk down the steps. She wanted a lift up. And I stood in amazement, and when I extended myself, I said, well, why don't you take her up? Well, of course, the reaction wasn't one that was welcoming to my air and my spirit. So I think we need more. I don't know how we are going to reach our parents.
All right, thank you very much. That's what we're trying to do here. That's what we're trying to do with this series of programs, really, about breaking the cycle. That's what it is. And so how do you, how do you counsel a parent in that kind of situation?
Well, again, we have to look at what, unfortunately, may be going on in the parent's life that has that parent not being able to interact in the correct way with the child, demonstrate the type of love, care, tenderness, attention that, from what I'm hearing, it sounds as though it's a very young child she's describing. And, because of the challenges parents are facing now, there really has been a disconnect between parent and child interaction. And you're asking a question, we keep asking the question. The only thing is probably to make education more publicly known, listing some areas where we believe parents need to, or they're recognizing they need to address, whether they would, again, I use the term, accept, admit, recognize that this is happening to me and I need to touch base with myself and perhaps get involved with, as I said, workshops or some other way, educate myself a little more, help me through what's happening to me, so that I can have that better interaction. Because, yes, there's a lot of distractions out here now.
Yeah. Sometimes, you get the sense, Dr. Margaret, that we have to be scientists of our own to be parents.
I think
is it necessary?
I think, adding to what Anne said, I think our values are a bit skewed in our society. Our children are inundated with activities, Every week we see children going to swimming, going to dance, going to this, and they're exhausted at the end of the day. We want our children to be the best the most competitive.
Or to give
to
them all
yes,
the
to give them all that we never
options,
had,
yeah.
to the extent that our values, as I said, are misplaced. We don't put emphasis on the things of communicating, of love, of sharing, you know. We just compare our children out there to others, and I think that is where the misfit comes in, where parenting is concerned. And we are a DDT society, as I call it. Don't do this, don't do that, you know. Everything is negative. We don't praise, we don't reward our children, we don't reward them with compliments. All our talk, verbal talk, tends to be very negative at the end of the day. Pick up your shoes, go to your room, clean this, rather than just relaxing on what happened today, you know. I remember when I used to pick up my kids from school, you know that you don't talk to them in the first half an hour, because that is when they're just exhausted. And then you ask them the question, so what happened?
How do you know that?
Because I've learned that.
No, when I mean,
Yes.
when I say you, I mean the
Okay.
average.
Right, so you, again, back to observing and knowing your triggers and knowing your children. When you pick up your child from school and they come and say, how was your day? Okay, no, whatever. You know, you pick up on cues like that and you respond to how they are.
So you cut them some slack at that.
Yes,
so you have to know when
not
to do
how
that.
you are and what you want at the moment and what you want to do. These are your children. And you know, Andy, unfortunately, I have to say this to parents. We tend to care for other people's children more than we do our own sometimes. We have a large reservoir of tolerance for people's children, you know, and we allow things. But when it comes
Isn't it
to
because
ours,
we have less emotional interest in other people's children than in ours, because so much of our emotions are tied up in our children, so we could afford to be sort of.
I think we want our children to be perfect, so we have less tolerance for how they are, you know, and we push them to do things that they're not ready for.
Yeah.
I think what it is that we've forgotten that we were children once, we were young once. And when you hear sometimes parents talk, let's say looking at the adolescent phase, how moody he is or how moody she is, we are forgetting we went through that phase. So there's a low level of tolerance, yes, understanding that you were a child once, you went through a lot, and you have to touch base with your children, help you to understand what's happening to them, so that you're better able to interact and help them through what's happening, than just decide. And as Margaret is saying, we cannot have a perfect child. There are no perfect children. So they are going to come to you with all sorts of issues, and it's up to you as a parent to handle it.
And you say there are no perfect parents either, but we have to work towards.
And we have to recognize that when we fall down, we just got to get up. Failure is part of this. We will make mistakes, and our children have to know that also, and to accept that mistakes are a part of life. Failure is a part of life. Getting up, that is the challenge.
I like to use the word enhancing our coping skills, enhancing ourselves, so that we're better able to.
It sounds as though we need some kind of a national emergency on parenting if we want to talk, if we want to address violence and the continuation of it and the perpetuation of it.
I believe so, because it goes across every environment, whatever. And I'll bring another example. There's a car, let's say in a secondary road, and a driver stops on the road so anyone behind him cannot pass. He's stopped there and he's talking to someone at the side of the road. And that driver behind dare not pop the horn, because once he does that, well, worse yet, he will have to remain there longer, or the driver in front start to curse him. It just shows you how aggression is going all over the place now. So yes, it is something that needs to be addressed in every which way it can.
Yeah, and talk about some of what the initiatives that you all might be in to try and address that and to break that cycle.
Yeah.
One of the things, as I always say, is through the schools, and because our teachers spend a majority of time with our children, more so than some parents. And I think what our schools have become places where we just push academia, we just push the subjects and so, and we forget civics, we forget social skills, we forget these things, and that has to come from a higher level to let teachers know that these things are important. So it starts there. unfortunately, and the real picture is, Andy, I think parents do not have the skills. And you were talking, how do we get that at a national level? We have to push our social services more, get people out there to go into homes where parents need help, where people don't even recognize that children are suffering and children are being abused. You know, we have to get to that stage where we put our resources into our people, into our children. We don't do that. We put our resources into what are those things? All other things, golf courses, whatever it is, into gambling, whatever it is. We need to recognize that our children, our adolescents, are the assets of our country. And that's where it needs to go.
Annie wanted to say something.
No, I was just going along with what, and I remember mentioning the social studies you mentioned, you know, in the school. And that is something, I mean, I know teachers may have a particular syllabus. We don't know what it entails, but that may be one way of starting to look in terms of what can be taught in the schools to help, you know, so that they could see a different way of feeling within themselves, understanding self, lifting that self-esteem, being able to interact. Because if you notice now, there is a lot of violence. It's physical now, where you get in social media showing schoolgirls fighting each other, and all of this is happening. Because for them, it's like that is the only way we can vent. That is the only way we can release whatever it is. Our anger is at such a peak that we just have to let somebody else feel the brunt of it. The question might be, where are they getting all of this? How can we now try and help them to know that's not the way to be able to resolve any conflict?
Yeah, which of you talked about the need for more attention to some of these discussions in community spaces, in community centers, and so on? So time and resources and space should be made available for that kind of activity in communities.
Yes. Especially in schools too. There need to be group discussions, peer mentoring programs, opportunities available in schools for children to talk about issues, and facilitators there who can conduct sessions like this in a safe environment. Children, I think, Andy, no longer feel safe at home or in schools, and they have many issues that they keep inside and they mask it, and you see the reactions in aggression and in violence. We need to create opportunities for children, and I would say this all the time, to talk, to give voice to how they feel, and to give voice in an atmosphere with their peer groups, with their peers, people who think like them and who can relate to what they're saying. And I find, as a counselor, as a psychologist, this has worked well for children when they are in groups their age and people who think like themselves.
What about sort of re-engineering what is known euphemistically as family life education? Because this is family life education we're talking about here.
It is, yes.
For parents to the same extent as it is for children in school.
Parents have to be involved.
It's important, and I think one of the things, Families in Action, we have been ever so often invited to PTA meetings, and in those meetings we would probably bring across certain topics as it relates to parenting, to help parents to recognize what, you know, some of the little pointers, the tips, the techniques, strategies to be used in terms of where they may be having challenges. And of course, as I mentioned, we do a lot of workshops. You mentioned centers, so we do go to the communities, utilizing the community centers, the schools, you know, wherever it's possible, where we can have these workshops. I just believe it's probably, for example, I'm seeing where in the schools you may be able to pinpoint certain children who may be experiencing what we may call negative behaviors, aggressive behaviors. And pinpointing those, can we also get the parents now involved with parenting education?
All right.
In terms of, yes,
sorry to butt in on you like this, but I'm seeing a question here from somebody on Facebook.
Yes.
I have a question. What advice do you have for parents of young adults who may be living on their own, but who may struggle from time to time with their own relationships and career? From somebody named Nicole.
Okay.
Parents of young adults.
Yeah, who may be parents of
so
young adults.
So what advice would you give to parents to
of
manage?
The adult, the young adult.
Who may be living on their own, but who may struggle from time to time with their own relationships. That's the young adults. How do you counsel the parents of these young adults who may be living on their own, but may be struggling from time to time with their own relationships and career?
Again, as I said, young adults would parent, how they would have relationships, how they see their own parents' relationships go. And my simple advice is communication again. Talk to those young adults if you see certain things happening. And in the schools, I think teachers need to observe more about, observe children, observe what's happening with them, observe if they are reacting, identify the triggers. And that's same question there, Andy. So do parents. Parents need to really pay attention to what's happening with the young adults.
I'm afraid we have to leave it there. Our time is running out on this. Thank you very much, Anne John and Dr. Margaret Naked Chatru. I'm Andy Johnson. Good evening. See you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, that was quick. I was about to add to that, but...
Come journey through the corridors of life.